Good evening to all our friends around the world. This evening, we're going to be dealing with the persecution of Christian communities in the Middle East, voices that are silenced and whom the Western media, academia, and media refuse to acknowledge. In fact, they put the force field up to real episodes of genocide while condemning fictitious episodes which are imputed to Israel, who at the moment is fighting a multi-front defensive war against the jihadi demon, persecuting and slaughtering Christians a few kilometers away up the road in Syria and also in the African continent. This evening, I have the great pleasure of hosting Father Ken from Florida, originally from Toronto, Jackline Wandera from Kenya, David Turner, representative of Church in Chains, and hopefully soon we shall be joined by Pastor Killion from Malawi, and also Shadi Khalloul Risho of the Christian Aramean community here in the land of Israel. However, we're going to start with our weekly award, and I'm going to hand over to Vitor Vicente, our co-host, who's going to make the presentation for this week.
Folks, I'm very thrilled to announce the recipients of the Golden Sausage for this week. We are not awarding one person, but two. But just before I share who is the recipient, I'm going to just show the trophy itself, the Golden Sausage, for those who are not familiar with it. This is what we award on a weekly basis. And yeah, so this week we are awarding two people. One is Antonio Guterres, and the other one is Mr. Karim Khan. Okay, so these two, they have truly earned this dubious distinction for their unwavering stand on human rights. Or I should say, their impressive selective focus when it comes to Israel. So it's a match made in sausage heaven. So I'm just going to show you how much are they enjoying the sausage. And if you don't know who are these people, you probably recognize the faces. Here is Mr. Antonio Guterres, and here is Mr. Khan. Now, the Golden Sausage is not just any award. It's a symbol of their shared talent for balancing high-minded ideals with a peculiar knack for bias that leave us all scratching our heads. Guterres, with his UN swagger, and Khan, with his ICC gravitas, have shown that they can chew through tough issues while conveniently leaving some scraps on the table. So here is to them. May their hot dogs always be saucy, their principles just a bit greasy, and their legacy as golden as this ironic prize. Congratulations, gentlemen. Enjoy splitting that sausage.
Thank you, Vitor. And as I mentioned before, the topic of our conversation this evening and the focus of our conversation this evening is to raise awareness about a problem which has been studiously ignored by Western governments, by academia, and the media. Let's start with David Turner, who's a representative of Church in Chains in Ireland. What could you tell us a little bit about your work?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Marco and Vitor, for having me on your show. Here in Ireland, Church in Chains is doing the work of trying to highlight and to be a voice for persecuted Christians worldwide. So while tonight our focus is on the Middle East and also the continent of Africa, worldwide, we estimate that there are well over 240 million Christians who living in countries where Christians are at risk of persecution. So not every one of those Christians is facing persecution on a daily basis, but they're living in countries where they could face persecution. So we're talking about maybe countries that you'd expect to be on this list, countries like China and North Korea and Pakistan. But there's also countries like India, the world's largest democracy, but which increasingly over the past number of years has been hostile for Christians with the growth of Hindu nationalism. And in the area of the world that we're considering tonight, we have a particular focus on the persecuted church in Iran. Iran, after the revolution of 1979, proudly proclaimed itself a thoroughly Islamic republic. And a few token churches were allowed to remain open for ethnic minorities, but it was expected that everybody else would be a follower of Islam. But God had different ideas, and there has been a revival of Christianity in Iran amongst the Muslim community, a huge interest in the New Testament being distributed, and many, many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, in fact, coming to faith in the Lord Jesus in Iran. But that has been accompanied by savage persecution. Christians have been martyred for their faith in Iran. And even as we speak tonight, there are many Christians in prison for their faith in Iran. We also have a focus on Egypt. Egypt maybe has gone in a slightly different direction to Iran in recent years, in that the President al-Sisi has been more tolerant of Christians in Egypt than previous presidents. And so that has been seen in a radical change in terms of permissions to open church buildings. And he established a committee a number of years ago, and that meets regularly and approves applications by churches to open premises for worship. Where the problems continue to lie in Egypt are at a societal level, because it's one thing to have a certificate from a government saying you have permission to build a church. It's quite another for that to be accepted by the local community. And so at community level, there continues to be sectarian hatred of Christians that sometimes flares up into sectarian violence. So then we also have a focus in sub-Saharan Africa on the persecution that Christians face there. And we have two particular focus countries there. One is Nigeria, where as perhaps every so often a case hits the headlines of violent attacks against Christians, massacres of Christians. Some people may remember maybe 2 or 3 years ago, 50 Christians being killed in a Catholic church in southern Nigeria, and that made the international headlines. But throughout the Middle Belt and northern parts of Nigeria, attacks on Christian communities are a regular thing. And the number of Christians martyred for their faith in Nigeria each year numbers 3,000 or 4,000. And we work with a partner there that seeks to support the Christian community under threat. But Nigeria is a country where the Christian church is really facing huge problems. And the other country that we have a major focus on in sub-Saharan Africa is the country of Eritrea. And the problem there is an authoritarian government with a president who is a dictator. And President Isaias Afwerki is afraid of any civil society group that gives their loyalty first to the civil society group rather than the government system. And so he closed down all churches that he didn't agree with and put huge pressure on the 3 churches that are allowed, which are the Roman Catholic Church, the Eritrean Orthodox Church, and the Lutheran Church. So those churches are allowed to open, but only under strict controls. And all other churches, such as Anglican, Methodist, Presbyterian, Pentecostal, Evangelical, Baptist, they're all banned and have been for the last 20 years. And members of those communities are in prison as we speak. We estimate that there are up to 400 Christians in prison in Eritrea. So, Marco, that gives you kind of an overview of some of the countries that Church in Chains is seeking to campaign on and support persecuted Christians in.
Thank you very much for that, David. Let me turn to Jackline. Jackline, you operate on the African continent. And you've been active as well in one of the critical areas, especially in South Sudan, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell me something about that?
Yes, I have had an experience personally, even before I moved to South Sudan to continue doing missionary work. I can say that I had really gone through a preparatory stage in my life, maybe from the time I decided to move from one denomination of Christianity to another one. I became I became a first-hand persecuted person because of changing a denomination, and I didn't know that I was just getting prepared because of what was ahead as I moved now to South Sudan to do missionary work. Yeah, so maybe before I can talk about the work and the encounters in South Sudan, I can talk about what I went through. Like when I decided to move from the mainstream church, like the church where I grew up in, I saw hell. I experienced hell on daily basis. I was denied basic needs. I was rejected. I was falsely accused. In fact, my days were very sad and my nights were long because sometimes I had to spend those nights outside the house because no one was letting me in. They tried to poison me. They saw me as a threat, as a suspect, as someone who is misguided. But I am happy that it all worked for good because, as I have said, it was just preparation because what lied ahead in my calling as a minister of the gospel was not going to be easy if I had not passed through what I went through. So in South Sudan, I have seen that persecution for Christians is something that is underreported. People talk about human rights and people make stories, but nobody really wants to talk about the realities that people are facing because of their religion, because they are Christians, or because they associate themselves with Israelites. Because you see, like in South Sudan, we have bodies of organizations that try to create awareness. Like I remember I was actively participating in an organization that was called C4I, Christians for Israelites. And every Thursday we would meet and just pray specifically for the peace of Jerusalem. And I was like, how comes I'm a Christian all these years, but I am not really aware that some of the issues that Israelites are going through actually affect human beings directly, or maybe they affect Christians directly, because when you read the Bible and you read also the stories that are happening in Israel, then for us, or maybe people like us who have faced persecution, you get to understand better that it is wrong for people to take your challenges just as a statistics and not put a face on it. Because where there is a rejection, where there is a persecution, there is also some human being, one person, one woman, one child, or one man facing challenges that they were not really supposed to face. And I went to South Sudan just after separation, like after South Sudan had been created outside Sudan, out of Sudan, sorry. And as a humanitarian, as a missionary, I began to see that because of faith, because of Christianity, people had been denied their rights to financial freedom. For example, by the time of separation, a lot of civil servants and other people who had worked in the former government were not allowed to get the benefits like the pension. So after separation, they were just told, okay, bye-bye, you can now go. So they came to South Sudan empty-handed. But for people who are in the correct religion, according to the regime, were given something to come with it and start their life. So most of these people who came without anything were Christians. And even as I'm talking today, I have, because I'm in constant communication, some of these people have nothing to call their own up to today. Some have even lost life. Some have become hopeless, too hopeless, just because they are Christians and no one talks about their rights, no one defends them properly. People just take advantage of them.
Right. When you say South Sudan, what type of regime is there? I mean, the persecution is taking place where?
I can say that in South Sudan, the persecution is persecution that is taking place is inherited from the previous state of the country, because, like I said, by the time of separation, and some of the reasons why separation had to happen was because the former Sudan was imposing religion on everyone. Like you have to become.
In which religion?
They were becoming, they were really isolating and targeting Christian faith. They were also looking at maybe they were using race, they were using religion to deny opportunities to people from the south because of their skin color, because of their Christian affiliation. Even they were denied opportunity to speak in English, and so many things. So some of the persecution is the trauma of what they have already gone through, and some of those chains take long to be broken. The constitution can be there, written on paper, but implementation takes a lot of goodwill, it takes a lot of resources, which has not yet been done.
Okay, but are we talking about persecution of another religious denomination?
You see, how I look at it is you cannot say someone is free to worship, someone is free to do whatever they want to do, and yet they don't have the resources to do it. It takes a lot. For example, if I'm 70 years old or maybe 60 years old and I have to start life afresh, it takes a lot of courage and hope for someone to even want to continue to live if they have already lost their livelihood just because they are from a particular religion or because they are Christians. Yeah.
I see. But it was the persecution by another religious group?
Yes, the persecution is by another religious group.
Which is? Can you be specific?
Islam.
Okay. So this is we have more clarity now. So there was coercive action. People were trying to coerce you to adopt Islam. That's what you're trying to. That's the essence of what you're saying. Jackline?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So the separation between North and South Sudan was due to the religious coercion that was taking place.
There was also a lot of abuse. For example, even within because I worked with a lot of people who had returned to the south, and what the stories that I used to get from them is that as much as they tried to comply and become Muslims, they still did not get the full privileges. For example, if you are in medical profession, you find yourself assigned to take care of maybe sicknesses that have been that have a lot of stigma with them. For example, it is you to take care of HIV patients, and you're not given enough resources. Like you are exposed to a lot of danger just because you want to fit in. And also, those who used to be actively religious, like they want to lead in the Islam or maybe in the mosques, they are not really considered as leaders, because in the end of the day, for example, if a black person leads the prayers, now an Arab must come to repeat or maybe redo, because I think according to them, maybe God will not hear someone black talking to him.
I see. So what you're saying that the religious aspect was compounded also by a racial prejudice. Racial prejudice.
Yeah.
I see. That is a theme that I hear. A recurrent theme that I hear. I hear that happening also among the local Arab population here in the land of Israel, because people of black or of African origin suffered discrimination as well. They're considered second-class Muslims as well, also because they're of African origin. That's something I hear as well. So what you say does resonate with me. We're having some connection issues. The other participants haven't been able to join us because of connection issues. I had been hoping to hear Pastor Killion, but he hasn't been able to connect in a sufficiently good way. Here he is again. Pastor Killion, can you hear me? Pastor Killion, can you hear me? No. He doesn't hear me. Okay, so we'll have to put Pastor Killion to one side for the moment. Father Ken, what can you tell me about what you've heard just so far? Have you been hearing? Obviously, some of the things you must be familiar with. Some of the episodes that Jackline has been describing.
Surprisingly, very little, but not surprisingly, very little. During my time in seminary, I spent some time in Ethiopia doing some work with a local mission there, with the Anglican Church in Ethiopia. And so the stories that you're saying back in 2015 were being told as well by many of the priests and training clergy at that site, of having to go and work caravans and being caught out and being the obvious only Christian in the group, and the danger of that. So I'm not surprised by the stories, but I am surprised by the virtual silence that we have in the West. And I mean, and that's true of many things that happen in continental Africa and outside of Europe even. But even in Europe now, we don't hear to the same extent of many of the things that we later learn about.
Indeed.
Ironically, we're more connected than we ever have been before, but then that connectivity is deep, but not wide in breadth. So we get very narrowly focused media attention on something for about 15 minutes, and then we move on to something else. And I mean, we can go into on many of those aspects of what's happening in the West that I think contributes to that as well.
Yes, I think you raise a very valid point, because we have been seeing rumblings, especially in Europe, of what has been happening in Africa for a long time with the attacks on Christian communities, churches, and parish priests, which to which the media, the governments, and academia have put the force field up. So yes, that you raise a very interesting point. Pastor Killion, can you hear me?
Yeah, no.
That was a brief intervention by Pastor Killion there. We're having some technical issues, folks. Looks as if we may not have too much of a contribution from Pastor Killion. David, what do you make of what you've just heard from Jackline?
Yes, indeed. I was very interested to hear about Jackline's experience, both in her own community when she decided to move church affiliation and the rejection that she faced. Um, and sometimes we hear stories like that coming from quite a number of countries. Sometimes it's leaving one church for another. Oftentimes, across the Muslim world, it's the decision to leave Islam and become a Christian. And a lot depends on the depth of your family's Islamic faith. In some situations, it can be that it is thought that it is the responsibility of the family to force you to return to Islam. So very often persecution begins within the family.
Mm.
But then it can move out, and it was interesting just to hear Jacqueline talk about the experience in South Sudan and the experience of persecution at the hands of the Sudanese government, which played a big role in the secession of South Sudan. Now, it is a
Yeah.
complicated picture in South Sudan, but there is no doubt that the strict Islamic pressures exerted by the Sudanese government over many years did play a huge part in the secession of South Sudan. And indeed, I recall in Sudan itself, us following very clearly the case of Maryam Ibrahim. And Maryam Ibrahim was somebody who converted from Islam to Christianity, and she was arrested. She was put in prison. She was pregnant. She gave birth in prison while under sentence of death for apostasy. What an amazing circumstance, and what an amazing testimony that woman has. Eventually, after advocacy and prayer from many, many Christian groups worldwide, she was released. She was able to leave Sudan, and now she lives in the USA. And I don't know if Father Ken has heard her story, but she regularly speaks at persecution focus events in the United States. But maybe the fact that Father Ken hasn't heard of her does highlight the point that has been made, that these cases maybe do not receive wide coverage. And I think, Marco, you referred to a force field going up, and sometimes it can seem a little bit like that. Other times, you just have to recognize that there's an awful lot going on in so many areas. Lots of people's rights are being abused. But it does sometimes seem as if the persecution of Christians is one that is regularly ignored by mainstream media here in the West.
Yes, and especially minority, we're seeing things play out, especially now in the Middle East, with the Christian minorities in Syria. Let's see, do we have Shadi Khalloul on the line? Do we have Shadi? Has Shadi managed to join us? He
Hear me?
should have entered with the video. Okay, the audio. Shadi, are you with us?
Yes, I am with you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well. Shadi, let me just introduce Shadi. Shadi is a member of the Aramean community here in the land of Israel, a community which, through Shadi's endeavors, is coming back to life. They are reappropriating their Aramean heritage. Shadi lives in the village of Gush Khalav, or Jish in Arabic, and he is busy with Christian communities, and the Christian, especially the Aramean community, is one of the most integrated communities in Israel. Shadi, what can you tell us about the situation of Christians and indeed other minorities in Syria now?
Okay. Well, I just this evening finished, first of all, to an article and at Daily Wire. If you want, you can also see and learn about what's happening there. The situation of Syrian Christians and Aramaic community in Syria is very worrying today. And we hear that major Christian forces and people want just to leave Syria and migrate, since HTS caught the leadership there, and they want West actually to help them from this persecution that's going on daily basis. Yesterday we had a video of Islamists actually coming with a megaphone in a car, driving in the neighborhood of Babtuma in Damascus, and Dwil'a neighborhood, which all are Christian neighborhoods in inside Damascus, with a large or a big calling them for Islamization, that come to the true religion and leave your faith, because your faith will take you to hell. That's what these Islamists are telling the Christians inside their neighborhoods. And they don't dare to say anything because they know that they are backed by the regime. And this is something that is happening now. We saw the videos. It's not like just the news without videos. Someone is saying something. No one can hide it. They're doing it clearly, and they are saying it clearly in videos that after the Alawites, they finish with the Alawites, the turn of Christians will come, and they will deal with the Christians later after the Alawites. So we know that the Christians are in danger, and it's only a matter of time when this regime and when these supporters of this regime will start with slaughtering also Christians and persecuting them and massacring them. And basically, they're doing ethnic cleansing today by terrorizing them in a way that sometimes with Alawites, they kill also some Christian families. We heard of some Christian families being killed. We heard of Christian youth being forced into Islamization. We saw some sheikhs of trying to convince Christians in their homes with jihadis carrying guns in their hands. The sheikhs telling the Christian guy and youth, you need to submit to Islam and you will save yourself. This Christian guy, he actually left his home at night. Actually, he ran away from home and he never returned back to his home. This is one incident. Another incident, a guy that was, they came to his house. Also, those same terrorist Islamists, they tried to force him into Islam, and he refused, and he told them with one sentence, I prefer to die with Jesus, our Lord Savior Jesus, than submitting to Islam. And they killed him immediately. So that's what's happening for Christians in Syria today. That's the situation. People are afraid to speak. People are afraid to act. And we made a demonstration this last Saturday for them to raise their voices, to raise their conditions, their bad conditions, and asking and demanding from Western powers, from USA, from France, from Europe, from Israel, and from anyone who can protect them to do so. And there's many ways to do it, either through politics and diplomatic relations of Western powers forcing this regime sponsors, which are the Turks, Ottoman Turks, actually, again, sponsoring this Islamist regime to maybe try to lessen this persecution or try to protect them by forcing or threatening the Ottomans or the Turks, you call them today, to give orders to their regime in Damascus, HTS, that they are the backup for them to stop harassing Christians and ethnic cleansing them, and that maybe this would work. Because if we are late, I don't think that Christians in Syria will stay. And the same process that happened in Iraq with the Iraqi Christians, from 1.5 million Iraqi Christians, we have left today 150,000 Iraqi Christians. And the next one would be Syrian Christians with 2 million population. I don't think we will have more than maybe 200 to 300,000 will stay in Syria. So this emptying Christianity from Middle East, from the Holy Land. This is the Holy Land. It's called Lebanon, Syria, Israel, and Jordan. That's all a Holy Land. The emptying this Christianity from there will bring only radical groups to rise. Will have no more moderate people in this region. Churches will be empty. Schools will not function. And those schools, the Christian schools that bring moderate leadership, will not exist anymore, and we will have only Islamist ideology and regimes and schools that people will be actually living in hell here, and peace for sure will not come out of it, neither for Israel, neither for Western world, neither for us as Christians in this land, and neither even for the Muslim people themselves.
Yes, for the moderate Muslim people who would like to live a normal, decent life, their lives are also being ruined as well. Father Ken and David Turner and Jackline, have you any questions you'd like to ask Shadi?
Shadi, have you a feeling that things are very much in the balance at the moment? That the violence that we saw against the Alawites was not officially approved from the top of the regime?
Well, the regime, I tell you that I followed up this case of the Alawites, and it's a true case. It happened. Massacres happened in huge numbers, and the regime called for these massacres. Actually, the orders came from the Ministry of Defense itself of the Syrian regime, of the HTS. We saw the forces coming from the north, from Idlib, and another forces came from Turkey, entered through Idlib region, which is north of the Alawite region. They entered from there to the coast of the Mediterranean, where the Alawite people live, and with Christians also in this area living among them and in some other villages around them. And they massacred them by the orders of the HTS regime. So, I mean, they didn't hide that. I mean, you can see the orders and the announcement of the regime itself, talking about sending forces to this area and fight they call them actually the remnants of the Assad regime. But with the remnants of Assad, the children and women and the elderly people are not remnants of Assad regime. If you were fighting only Assad regime people, you would kill maybe youth who are fighting in a uniform or with guns near to them. But they didn't do that. They went to homes, they dragged people out of the homes, and they killed them. And even those who were caught into their hands, they let them walk in four, means like dogs. And they request them to bark like dogs. And once they reach them, the line that they are standing, they just put the bullet in their head and kill them. It's the same way they're killing Christians in Nigeria. It's the same way they killed other Christians in Africa, and we saw it in other places, in Egypt or in Libya with this ISIS. It's an ISIS regime. It's an ISIS regime. Let me remind you, this Julani was part of ISIS before. And later on, he went out from ISIS and he left ISIS and become member of Jabhat al-Nusra. And now he's a president of Syria. And he was part of the massacres against Christians in Mosul, in Iraq. And he was part of the massacres against Yazidis. So what do you think? He would now change himself because he's wearing a suit?
Yes, indeed. You raise a very interesting point, Shadi, because
Now, I just want to finish by saying one thing that no one is thinking about. The solution for this diversity in Lebanon and in Syria is federal system. Every nation within these countries have a right to rule himself, to play the game in his region as he believed, to teach his culture and his language and his educational system and protect themselves. Lebanon should be divided to a federal state, confederation like in Switzerland. That's the regime that should work for Lebanon and Syria, because you cannot impose on Christians a Islamic teaching. You cannot impose on Muslims a Christian teaching. You cannot impose on Alawites, which are not a Muslim sect, by the way. They made them just lately, approved them under Assad regime and Shia involvement as a Islamic sect, but basically they are not. And you cannot impose them as well, on them Islamization. And the opposite, the Alawites can, as a minority group as well, cannot impose on Sunnis an Alawite whatever thinking. So for these diversities of nationalities and ethnic religious groups, and as it's in Syria and in Lebanon, the best system that can function is like in Switzerland, which is a federal system and not a central government.
But in the meantime, Shadi, the jihadis have to be defeated, because the jihadis aren't interested in the federal system.
Of course. They are interested in empowering themselves and make an Islamic terrorist state. And the next step would be Israel and Western powers, because they will start exporting those terrorists to the West with orders and clear orders to the ones who are already live in Europe and in the United States to start doing terror attacks and complete their actually waves of immigration to the West with taking over in Europe and in United States and make a big mess of those countries.
Are you in touch with people with the Christian community in Syria?
I am in touch, yes. I am in touch with many of the people who are sending us specifically from the diaspora, that are in touch with their families inside Syria, telling us exactly what's happening. And when I told you that many of them want to emigrate, that's the feeling of most Christians in Syria today.
Right, right. So we are seeing real ethnic cleansing and real genocide, as opposed to the phony the libelous accusations of genocide against Israel. That's very
Israel is a democracy. If they want
indeed.
to, I wish Syria would be run as a democracy like in Israel or Lebanon or other countries in the Middle East. I wish.
Mhm. Right, right, indeed, because the Christians here in the land of Israel are very well integrated. I think, Shadi, you can attest to that. You are the personification of integration, as I know you well.
Of course.
But I think we should draw attention to I'd like to draw attention to the situation of the Christians who no longer live under Israeli control, rather than what's happening in the so-called Palestinian territories. What can you tell me about that?
That's the same situation. What I told you, it's not clear like the Syrian one, because I can give here two scenarios or two pictures about those Christians in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip is like in Syria. It's obviously a Hamas, Ikhwan, Brotherhood movement that are ruling or ruled Gaza Strip exactly like El Julani ruling Syria under Islamic Sharia laws, and the source of judgment on those places would be the Islamic Sharia. That's the regime in Gaza, Hamas. So Christians there were really oppressed by that regime. They were actually terrorized. Many of those Christians were killed. Their libraries, books, just for selling books that enlightened people, they burned their libraries after threatening the man who didn't submit to their orders, and they killed him. They killed him. And
Yeah.
that's Gaza. They only that's why their numbers diminished to be only 600 people before even the October 7 war. 600 people in Gaza, only under Hamas. So in the West Bank, in Bethlehem, and in Judea and Samaria, Ramallah, to remind you, was a majority of Christians.
Indeed,
Ramallah
indeed.
and Bethlehem were both of them majority of Christian inhabitants. Today are Muslim inhabitants, and the more and more people leaving those areas from Christianity, Christian believers, because they cannot afford living in a culture of terror and a culture of violence as it is in the Muslim world. Sorry, this is the truth.
Yes,
And we
yes.
can see it's coming to Israel too. Many Christians leaving Nazareth. Where they are leaving Nazareth? To a Jewish majority towns. Why they are leaving Nazareth to majority Jewish towns? Because in a Jewish towns, they can enjoy freedom.
Indeed.
They can enjoy a freedom of worship, freedom of movement. Their women can go out without any harassment. So they don't fear for their children that they will be killed by a Muslim gangs inside this culture.
Yes.
So many of them go to Haifa, go to Upper Nazareth, go to Ma'alot, Ma'alot, or to other places, and that's where the how Christian in that where Christian towns like holy Christian sites, and like Nazareth, like Bethlehem, even East Jerusalem, under the Muslim, like majority who live inside Eastern Jerusalem, they don't, for example, allow Christians to behave as they wish. They don't want to see a Christians side with Israel or be well integrated within Israel, because this is against their cause of fighting the Jews, and they want only to show that the Jews are bad, not only for Muslims, but also for Christians. And that's why they oppress or force the Christians to speak against the Jews. And that's what we hear in the Western world, because they want to make the Jews look bad. And I see it in every, I can give many examples on that. I can give many examples when we called, for example, for a Christian integration within the state of Israel and include serving in the IDF to encourage them to be part of the system, like the Druze, for example, in Israel. And this way we can get better chances even of supporting and helping other Christians around us in other places, because Israel would consider what we have to say much better, like the Druze, for example, are protecting the Druze in Syria today. We could protect, if we were involved like the Druze in the system of Syrian Christians and Lebanese Christians, for example. But the Muslims don't want us to do that, and they were threatening the patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church back then and of the Latin Church to go against this process and give announcement in the name of the church against this integration process toward inside the state of Israel.
So what you say certainly resonates with me, Shadi. My Christian friends confirm what you say. I think it's very important to remind our viewers that before the Oslo Accords, there was a Christian majority in Bethlehem, which is just up the road from me, by the way. The Christian population was 80% in Bethlehem. It's now 20%. And I can certainly confirm, too, that Christians now tend to gravitate towards Jewish neighborhoods as well. This is an increasing phenomenon, because certainly in a fundamentalist Muslim environment which has taken hold and which has even hijacked the decent Muslims. Unfortunately, the decent Muslims are also living under this terrible pressure, and it's also preventing the integration of decent Muslims too. Does anybody want to say anything? Father Ken, David Turner, Jackline, would you like to ask some questions to Shadi?
Well, I'm stricken by the fact that most of the news reports and media that I've been hearing about Syria has been that the new regime is more moderate than the Assad regime, and of course, what we're starting to hear is that that's not at all the case, and that it's much more like other nations that have lost the dictator, and what comes in behind it is invariably worse than what was before, even if what was before wasn't great.
Yeah.
And so it's very shocking to hear the disconnect between what we hear and what I'm hearing has been experienced on the ground. So again, to Western ears, I don't think it's that the West doesn't necessarily care. It's just that we don't hear it, and our attention has been drawn in other places. And we must hear the same thing that's happening in Nigeria is being framed as a political movement, and not connected to religion or persecution, in the broader sense. More of a civil unrest is what it's kind of framed as, and so I think that obscures quite of what's happening there, and I'm really sad to hear that we're not hearing of this, particularly within the West, but in the churches in particular as well, where our brothers and sisters in faith are suffering and goes almost unnoticed.
Mm.
Yes, I'd like to echo what Father Ken has just said. It's very important how the persecution of Christians is framed. And so often, as he has said, words like civil unrest or conflict between communities, or sometimes the situation in Nigeria is portrayed as a Christian-Muslim conflict. And even the placing of the word Christian ahead of Muslim in that phrase suggests that it's Christians are initiating a conflict. In actual fact, what's happening is that Christians are victims in 99% of the violence that happens in Nigeria. But until it's framed correctly in Nigeria and in every country, it's difficult to get action until a correct understanding of the situation is arrived at.
Yes, what you say certainly resonates with me, because certainly as a Jew, we see how the conflicts are deliberately, willfully, and knowingly misrepresented by the media, by foreign by foreign governments. So that certainly makes sense.
Yeah, I had an experience probably about 6 or 7 years ago. It was just before COVID happened. In the late 90s, early 2000s, we started to see around the Toronto area a real uptick in the presence of Coptic churches starting to pop up in strip plazas and old car dealerships, and then eventually building their own churches. And this very, very large Coptic church was built down the road, and everybody thought it was a mosque at first, and until it was pointed out that there were crosses all along the side of the building, and this was in fact Coptic. And people were absolutely shocked to hear that the reason that all of a sudden there was Coptics coming, because they thought it was great sign of integration and of diversity. But what nobody seemed to realize was that the reason that there was this huge uptick, as great as it was to see new churches being built, but the reason was they're fleeing Egypt in droves, and where there was really very little in the areas where I grew up of a presence of a Coptic church, all of a sudden there were 3, which in the context of the West, where churches are closing and many of the mainline denominations are in full-on collapse. When we start seeing large churches being built, it should be something for celebration. But most Canadians, at least on the ground, had no idea what was happening. And I think it all ties in with the political and social reality in the West now, is that we equate the West with Christianity in the church, and we equate all of the bad things that Western nations have done throughout history as being the only aspect of both Western culture and Christian culture. And so, as David was saying, the assumption is that if it's colonialist, it must be the church, which ignores large swaths of history and the church of all of North Africa was at one point Christian. And some of the greatest saints of the church in the history come from North Africa. St. Augustine, not the least of them.
Indeed.
And there's just this there's this undercurrent now in the West, and I think this really does push into this, that somehow that when Christians are oppressed, or if they're being genocided, perhaps they're kind of the comeuppance for the evils of history.
Yeah. There's a willful ignorance of history. What is happening to the Christians now in the Middle East? It's what happened to my co-religionists in the past 80 years. Basically, the Middle East, with the exception of the state of Israel, the Jewish state, has been rendered Judenrein. Okay, basically that is the story of the Middle East. And what's happening now in the Middle East is basically lands are being emptied of their Christian populations where they're not being slaughtered.
Yeah.
Yeah, just on that note, Father Ken, if you are familiar with the situation in Mozambique, I'm just speaking of Mozambique as a Portuguese speaking person, as a Portuguese national. better said, and it's often ignored, even in Portugal, what's happening there. And it's for the reasons you just mentioned, that just because is Christians being prosecuted, the press doesn't pay enough attention. The way that it's portrayed is that, yeah, the church was there for a while, the Christian churches, and now they need to pay back for the dominance they had for a couple of centuries. And while this is happening, like lives are being slaughtered on a daily basis, there's a bloodshed happening, and it's just enormous, and it doesn't seem to stop at any moment. It's very sad. It's very sad that we are more concerned with our past, with what happens in real time in Mozambique. Just a note I want to highlight here. Maybe in a future session we can bring someone from Mozambique, Marco.
Yes, certainly. By all means. Yeah.
Well, and interestingly enough, and terrifyingly enough, I mean, what we start to see echoed by world leaders, such as what happened in Canada during, between 2021 and 2024, there was over 112 churches either vandalized or burned down, and since 2010, between 2010 and 2023, 592 places of worship have been burned down, and more than 400 of those are churches. And yet, when the Canadian government, when the Prime Minister of Canada at the time, Justin Trudeau, was speaking of this rash of church burnings across the country, he said that it was unacceptable, but it was understandable, that the anger was understandable, and that was reaffirmed by other members of the Canadian government, and it does seem to echo, or at least give credence to the cultural understanding that somehow it's bad to do bad things to Christians, but we kind of understand why we're doing it.
Yes. You raise a very interesting point, as if somehow the Christians had it coming. This
Right.
is of course they studiously ignore that, as you mentioned before, that where the Muslims now dominate all of North Africa and Turkey were Christian lands that were subjected to jihad and ultimately forced conversion to Islam. That is a historical fact. Now, when they say that people weren't forced to convert to Islam, of course, there's the usual sleight of hand involved here. Of course, they create conditions whereby it remains very inconvenient for you to have another religion aside from Islam. That's the general mechanism. They will say you're not forced to convert to Islam, but on the other hand, should you not convert to Islam, your life will become rather unpleasant.
Yeah, and as you're speaking, I can't help but think that from the church context, as a priest and a pastor, one of the parts of the conversation around many of the social issues that we hear around the world, but particularly here in the West, where I'm more deeply a part of, is that we hear a lot of stories of wanting to tell of the sins of the church, but we don't have a conversation around reconciliation and how do we reconcile one another to each other. And so if we stay in this place that we have to continually be punished for what has happened, and I'm not making excuses for what has happened. What has happened in the past, the church has some blood on its hands, of quite a great deal. But when we demonize somebody, when we only see the evils that they've done, and we do not speak of the good, and we do not speak of the willingness to move forward, it creates that indifference, and I think largely that, and the increasing secularism of the West, it just means that I think too many people just have this disinterested veil. It kind of reminds me of St. Peter, and he speaks, now we see dimly as if through a veil. And I think that's very much the way that the West looks at it. And I think the church needs to repent of that. We're spending so much time on trade wars in the United States and Canada, and yet people are dying. And so maybe a little less on vanity projects and a little more on reality checks around the world, and not being afraid to call evil out where it is. Even though we realize at the same time that in some cases, the culture and the church that we are in have also fallen short in those ways as well. But otherwise, we're just doomed to keep going. I'm thinking of Jackline and what she's going through there. I mean, we should be hearing about this. There should be care about this. We should be having meetings about this and not water bottles and these sorts of things, because their lives matter.
Indeed, absolutely, yes. David?
Yes, I'd just like to echo what has been said. I'm going to have to leave the podcast just now, but yeah, I think the very fact that this has happened has started a conversation about why these things matter, and what Jackline has described, what Shadi has described. What I've reported from the countries that we have partners in, it's all reality, and it's all something that needs to be highlighted. I think earlier in the podcast, somebody mentioned it needs to begin within the church itself, and there needs to be a greater focus on our brothers and sisters who face persecution, and let's hope and pray that that will be the case. In the midst of a lot of suffering, we do serve a risen Lord, and we serve a Lord who promised that he will build his church, even if the gates of hell are striving hard, they will not prevail. That's the promise of Jesus. And there are so many brave Christians in the persecuted church who are trusting and holding on to Jesus. And it's part of our role, those of us who live in countries where there is freedom, to encourage the church in the West to support them.
Yes, amen. And I mean, the truth is, the persecuted church is the majority of the church now, by a large margin.
Yes.
I mean, Asia and Africa are the centers of Christianity. Often people think it's Europe and the West, but it's not, and it hasn't been for a very long time. But I think that the Western's illness that we're having within the church is we've adopted a lot of those social realities and viewpoints that somehow the church is not a divine institution, and there's kind of this self-hatred that we started to have, where we don't want to speak about what's happening to other people, because we've almost adopted some of that feeling that maybe we deserve this, or we need to atone for sins of the past. And certainly we do in some cases, but this isn't the way to do it.
Yes, I agree.
Vitor, have you anything to add?
No, I just want to
Before
say
we close?
I just want to say, from my perspective here in Ireland, it's visible the decline of the Christian church, and it's translated into our Irish identity is at stake, which is very sad to see, even from an expat perspective, because you wanna go around and try to feel the history, and it's less and less the case. And I'm not talking just about Ireland. If I would be living in Moldova or in Japan, I would feel the same way. So it's not about making a case for Ireland or for Christianity, but it's about making a case for culture and civilizations as such. So we all need to preserve our heritage, because without that we are just nothing. So that would be my final remarks.
Yes, you're right. There's certainly a sense of disorientation. I say this as a Jew, of course. I'm a little bit of an outsider in these, but certainly the fact that church attendance in Ireland has decreased by 80%. I think I remember when I was a boy, I used to watch all the people stream to the Sunday services, and basically it was a full house when I was growing up, watching these people stream, and they had a sense of purpose, which to a great extent I think has been lost, because Christianity has lost its vigor, and people are disorientated, I believe, to a great extent, and they can't really navigate a moral dimension which would permit them to take the necessary action with regard to their co-religionists in the parts of the world which we've just described.
Yes, more about these days that no morals are the new morals, which is very sad to see. it's like you stare at the window and all you see are zombies. Of course, there are exceptions. Most people are proud they don't have anything to aim, like it was a noble way of living a life. But that's how. It's not just the youth. This is across the board in my perception. So maybe we'll come to a closure with that. I know it's a negative note, but that's what it is. So I want to thank every single participant for the effort to be here. I know there were tech issues with most of us, but that's just part of the deal. We need to accept, but at least we managed to handle this conversation, and hopefully next time there will be more positive notes to share. That's what we would like to. If not, we'll be here trying to amplify your voices while they're being silenced by criminals. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.